Hey guys!
Hey guys!
Welcome back to Plots with a Twist,
where we discuss books,
amongst other things. And today, what we doing? We doing a little,
not so much a tag, but
we're just doing a list.
A list for you guys, a book list.
So today we're going to be discussing some books that some redeeming books, some books that start off a little slow, or something about them in the beginning is like, I don't know about this, but somehow, some way, they turn it around and they end really, really nicely with a pretty bow on top.
Exactly. So books that were whack, but then turned out to be good towards the end.
All right, so let's get into it.
Okay, so Kristen, you go first. What is a book that you felt was either a drag or just wasn't into in the beginning, but it ended up being really good? Don't look at my list.
Okay, so for me, say when I don't think I've mentioned this book since a TBR like last year. So that is Conviction by Denise Mena. So
I remember you reading that.
I don't even remember what it's about. That was a long time ago. I just recall that being the case for me. Now, it isn't the highest rated book ever. Like, it's actually a very mediocre book. But, so what was it about? It was about this girl who was listening to a podcast. Because you sent it to me. It was on Reese Witherspoon's thing.
It was. And I was like, oh, Kristen, this is Kristen.
Yes. It's listen to a murder, true crime podcast. And basically, she heard a crime on this guy who she had met and knew before. So, the circumstances of the crime, she felt like wasn't true, or something about it drew her in. So she just went on this wild goose chase to try to figure out, I don't know what prompted her. I guess she was going through something. Just went on this chase to figure out what actually happened, what was the nature of the crime, and what was the connection between this woman who was also previously involved in her life at this place she worked. But yeah, so I will say for me, the book started off kind of like, this is too much too fast, especially with, I said, a girl listening to a podcast and all of a sudden getting a car and driving to figure out, ooh, I want to figure this out. To me, the catalyst didn't make any sense. So initially it was kind of like,
what's going on?
How
did it get there?
Right. First of all, how'd you get here? Why are you so invested? You was listening to a podcast of somebody you met, a story involving somebody you met some years ago. They weren't currently in your life. You didn't even know they was involved in this situation that you heard on the podcast. So it's like, what reason? What's the reason? What was the reason?
Right.
But I will say as the story progressed and went along, it did kind of start to pull me in, and I did want to know how it was going to end. And I will say for me, it was one of those stories that ended in a way where it's kind of like the person or the protagonist got their justice, or got their just desserts or whatever.
I like that. I like stuff that ends
the
way it's supposed to end. Now I don't like realistic. I like justice to be served.
So that's basically, because that was my concern when I was reading. I was like, how is it going to wrap up? But then it ended up wrapping up pretty nicely. So that made me enjoy the overall story more. So that was Conviction. I'm not saying read it. I'm not saying read it. I'm just saying for me to fit in this category, it started off let me not finish this book, to, I finished it and it was okay.
So a book that I started to read that kind of dragged in the beginning. I'm not gonna lie, it kind of dragged all the way through the book, but I am glad I finished it because it was a good story and a good book and kind of like a history lesson. And that was reading Lolita and Taran by Azar Nafisi, I think is her name. So I came across this book because she was the author of this book was doing a speech on YouTube, and she was talking about, she was doing a talk with one of my other favorite authors, Sandra Cisneros and whatever. And I was like, well, who's this lady? I never heard of her. And people in the comments were just raving about her books. And this was one of the books that they were talking about. So I said, let me pick it up and read it. And it's basically it's a true story about basically her time teaching in Tehran, and how during that time there was a war going on, and basically the girls there were fighting to go to school and basically do regular things while there's war going on, and while education for them wasn't really being supported anyway. So it was just like all the girls had different stories. All the young ladies that she taught had different stories about why they couldn't come to class, or, you know, just like different things going on in their life, like trying to get an education. And also Dr. Nafisi, like, trying to, how do you say it, like, basically figure out she still wanted to teach, and like teaching the land that she was in, where she was from, because it was just so hard, like, just for them to get certain things done, and like the government was always interfering with like their lessons and all that type of stuff. So it was just a really good book. It did drag a little bit because it's a nonfiction book. Not that that means it's gonna drag, but it was very, not textbooky, but almost in a way, like just how she was telling the story, where you thought it would be more personable, but it did also have those elements of the personable in it, like when she would tell different stories about the different girls that were in her class and everything. So and a lot of the stories were like heartwarming or like sad and stuff. So it was just a really good book, and I'm glad I finished it. That's a book for me that I was like, but it's worth a read, and I'm telling you to read it if you haven't read it. Okay. But it might be a little drag, but you should still read it.
Okay, so a book for me that is a great, like, one of my favorite books. But like when I was thinking about books that I almost tapped out on, that started off a certain way, this is the first book that came to mind, and that's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. So for me, the beginning was like, oh, what is happening? I think it was partially like him setting up the scene of everything. So if you have not read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, let's rewind a bit. I feel like you've been living under a rock, but just so you can get an introduction. So Stieg Larsson has a trilogy of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series, or the Millennium series, that's been picked up by another author now. But the first three are OG. He unfortunately passed before he could finish. But The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is about this girl, this weird, or she's perceived as weird, perceived as low intelligence, but she's highly intelligent, a hacker, world-renowned really, that works for this security company. And her story kind of intertwines with this journalist who is tasked with looking into this family to figure out what happened to the patriarch's niece. His favorite niece, who was probably in line to like take over his empire or something like that. So they somehow, or not somehow, but basically she is hired by that same person to research the journalist. And when the journalist kind of hit a snag in his research, he then hired her, and they kind of come together and figure out what's going on with this particular family and their story. So that's like the best way to kind of encompass what the story's about, and then it spirals into other events. But for me, when I first started reading it, was just like, this is a popular book, like
you couldn't get into it.
Ew, like, yeah. And so I think for me, what kept me in there is that I knew it was a popular book. I knew it was a book people enjoyed. I knew it was a book that people like praised. So I was like, something has to turn at a certain point. And I think at the time, I was restarting my reading journey, so I kind of attributed the slow start to that more so than anything. Because now I probably would have just been like, like, I know a good book when I see one, and this one isn't, but no, it is. So yeah, I think for me, when he was setting up everything and you didn't know what was happening, it was kind of like, yeah, I don't know about this, but once the story started to develop, once you started to get into it, once you started to understand what was actually happening, that's like one of the best books ever. If you have not read it at this point, you need to do so. So that's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It ended nicely. It went on to do nicely. And then the second part with the other authors, okay.
I still like them, but yeah, it is a little different. Okay, so another book for me that kind of dragged in the beginning but ended up being the bee's knees is one of my favorites that I feel like Kristen still hasn't read, is Becoming by Michelle Obama. You read that?
No.
Okay. So this book, like, at first I tried to read it, y'all, and Becoming is basically Michelle Obama's memoir, like, about her life before she became the first black first lady, and then it goes a little bit into her time as a first lady too, but it more so focuses on like how she came to be who like she is. So when I first started it just was a little boring. It was getting a little boring. It was just basically going through, it starts from like her like childhood. And I wanted to say, like, why couldn't I get into it? Maybe I just wasn't in the right mind frame, whatever, or maybe it just started a little slow. I think it did start slow. But as I continued to read it, I put it down for a few months. And then I came back to it. Yeah, I did. And I came back to it, and I was like, let me finish this book. It's Michelle Obama. And everybody had been saying it was good, so I was like, let me finish it. And the more I read it, and I was like, wow, she's such a good writer, for one. And her story is I've talked about this book on this channel, so y'all know, like, her story is just very inspiring, and it's just so interesting to see, like, I like to see, like, how, like, successful people, how they get to where, how they become successful, right. So she just really went into detail, like, about how she just became that girl, and it was just really inspiring. I feel like for anybody, woman, man, like, should read it. Yeah, that's Becoming by Michelle Obama. Loved it.
Okay. So for me, the next book that I feel like started off slow, wasn't sure I was gonna be into it, and got into it and really thoroughly enjoyed it, was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. So I just read that this past December. So if you've watched our previous videos, I said, like, that is a book I avoided for whatever reason. And so when I started reading it, I was like, this is why. This is why I didn't want to read this book. It started off so slow. So The Nightingale is about these two sisters during World War II in France, and just how the circumstances of the events during the war kind of drew them down different paths. One was more a rebellious spirit, wanted to do what she can to help in the liberation of France. The other was more of a kind of timid, reserved person, and she ended up trying to go along to get along, and just ended up in certain circumstances that weren't ideal as well. So yeah, it just was a really kind of detail heavy book, which typically I don't mind, but it's kind of like sometimes when the details don't come together smoothly, I'm like, but it was just kind of like extra details that I didn't initially think was necessary, but they were beneficial as I started to read along. And then other than that, it was just kind of, I don't do history, wartime stuff. Like, I don't do that for fun. So when I'm reading, I'm like, ugh, okay. It initially felt like it was a little bit more history than I like in my historical history books. I mean, well, what is it? Historical fiction books. Even though historical is part of the genre. Right. So yeah, but as I read along, I actually got really drawn into the story. I was really intrigued by both of the sisters, even though one seemed to have all the action going on, the other one seemed to not really have much going on. But as the story progressed, you can see how the events really curved, how they kind of navigated through their lives. And so it just ended up being a really touching, really heartwarming story. So yeah, I ended up liking it. It started off really slow, but I was like, okay, I see why people like this. So that's The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna.
Okay, so another book. No. So another book that started off slow for me, but I ended up really enjoying, was the first Game of Thrones book. What's it called?
A Game of Thrones. It's called
Game of Thrones. I wasn't sure. So yeah, by George, what's his name?
R.R. Martin.
Yes. So y'all know what Game of Thrones is about. I don't even have to. Do I really need to go into what
they may not?
Can you give a synopsis? It's too much. It's about a battle. It's about different families in this like medieval fantasy land time, and basically a bunch of different houses and families fight over the throne. So who wants to be king? King in the west, king in the north, king in whatever.
Yeah.
So
that's good enough.
Yeah. So Game of Thrones was turned into a popular TV show, and I can't remember. It's been so long now. I want to say I read the book first.
You did.
And then I saw this show.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe.
I think I did. And then I had stopped reading the books. I read the first 3 books, but I stopped because eventually the story started like mixing up with like the TV show, and it kind of was like veering off a little bit from the books. Anyway, that's besides the point. So when I first read the first Game of Thrones book, I had a hard time following because it's setting up like all the houses, all the families. And if you know that there are so many families and so many names and characters in Game of Thrones in general, but especially like with the different houses, like they introduced so many different like characters that it was hard to keep up. And I was like, I don't know if I could. And I had a little short fat book, so it's already small print and a lot to read, and they're like this thick. So I'm like, I don't know if I could do this, but I ended up finishing it and really enjoyed it. Obviously, it was just like one of the best things ever as far as like a fantasy books go, because I always say that I don't really like fantasy.
But my thing is, if you did the labor to read through a good amount of his writing, all these other ones I've been reading should be a cakewalk.
I know, but that was long ago when I was like really into my like, I had a lot of time on my hands back then too. So like I can remember like sitting there reading Game of Thrones books like at work, and people like, why are you reading that? Like, but anyway, yeah, like it ended up being really, really good. I'm glad I finished it. If you haven't read, I know everybody by now has seen the show, but if you haven't read it, go ahead and read the first couple of Game of Thrones books. I'm gonna try to finish. That's a life goal, 5-year plan of mine. Like to finish the whole series or whatever.
He gotta finish it.
Yeah, is he done? Is he still writing?
He's not done. He's still writing.
But has he come out with any more?
No.
I feel like he's done with this since the show kind of like the last few seasons messed it up.
No, he's supposed to be like was supposed to be significantly like.
I don't think he's gonna
done with the. He has 2 more he's supposed to do, according to the word on the street.
They should have waited to do the show until.
Well, that's why the show ended
done
the way it did.
Yeah, because it's like, let him finish it. Why y'all trying to finish it all stupid? But anyway, that's Game of Thrones, the first Game of Thrones book, installment book.
All right. So the next book for me, and we have I'm not going to go too much into details because we have a whole review, and we still get little comments on that review. That's
a popular one.
That's our popular one, and that is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Isn't that who wrote it?
Yep. I can.
It's like I read so many books. It's like amazing when I can remember the author, let alone a character in that book.
That's why I'm like, Kristen, do the synopsis because I forget what it's about. I'm like, I can't hold it all.
So in Where the Crawdads Sing, it's just a coming of age story, kind of intertwined with the mystery of this young girl. She lives in the marsh, Kaya. And just her kind of going through her life, being isolated from the rest of society, being judged, criticized, and just her growth and, learning phase, as well as this kind of later mystery that happens some years down the line, as well as this love story. So it's a lot of stuff that's tangled in this book that kind of comes out as you read along. But initially, I almost put it down.
Really?
Initially, it was so slow and it was so ladled with this southern vibe that I was like, ooh,
I don't know where this is going.
I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really know what the book was about when I read it. I just knew it was a popular book that everyone kept recommending. Like, literally would go in the library to pick it up, and the librarian's like, oh my God, you're going to enjoy this. So yeah, it was just one that really I was really reluctant in the beginning in the first place. And then when I started to read it, I was like, yeah, this is why I don't read this type of book. And then as I started reading, I was like, ooh, this is good. This is starting to get, okay. So it was one that just really, you had to hang in there to see how everything unfolded, see how everything came together, especially when it was initially alternating between like her being young and then this mystery in the future. You're like, what do these two have to do with each other? So as the story kind of progresses and going along, you're like, oh, okay. So everything starts to come together. But yeah, when you initially open that book, the first couple of chapters, you're like,
what is going on? Where is it going? Yeah.
I don't know about this. But yeah, it was a good one. So that's Where the Crawdads Sing.
Okay. So my next book is one that Kristen didn't finish, and she low-key hates, but I loved it. And it did start off a little like, I don't know where this is going, or what's really, not that I don't know where this is going, but I don't know what's happening. That is The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So So I just chopped that all up. But anyway, so that is a book about a slave. Look, I done forgot. What is it about? A slave that
is his name Hiram?
Yeah, a slave named Hiram who basically is tasked with like
I didn't even finish that book. I remember.
Helping out in the underground like railroad, and he is gifted with a power that he has this power that allows him to kind of help and aid in like setting people free. So it has like a little supernatural element, but also like the historical element of like Harriet Tubman and the
just the slave,
the Underground Railroad. Why can't I say that word?
Underground Railroad, slaves escaping, you know, from the being enslaved people,
and going from the South up into the North,
or let's
and how
call them enslaved people, not slaves.
Yes,
there you go.
And basically, how he was a part of that whole operation of moving enslaved people from the South.
Boring still sounds. I just
So it was a good book. It did start off in a way that it started off a little slow, and what I do remember about the beginning was kind of not knowing the way that they introduced his power in the book. It was a little confusing, and you kind of didn't know what was going on. But that didn't make me like not want to read it. It did kind of like.
Make you be like, what?
Yeah, kind of like what was going on, and then the slowness at the beginning was kind of like, because it goes into his whole story, like from when he's a child and how his parents and what, you know, just y'all know, like when it comes to like life stories, like sometimes it can be a little slow when people are going from the very beginning to like present time. So I will say that I really enjoyed how the story progressed and how it ended. Although it had an ending that was kind of like wasn't completely like finite, but I did enjoy the story, like the journey up until. So I finished it. Kristen, on the other hand, could not get into it to save her life, and she tried y'all. She tried. She kept putting it down and picking it up and putting it down.
I'm gonna finish it,
but please at this point. But that was one that I could see like it did start off a little slow, and it had some moments I was like but I was determined to finish it, and I actually really enjoyed the book. So y'all know that because I think we've talked about it here on this channel a couple times. So yeah, that's The Water Dancer.
All right, and the last book I am going to mention is a book you didn't finish.
Well, excuse me,
and that is Britt Marie Was Here by Frederick Bachman.
I didn't finish that one.
Okay.
She's annoying.
So yes, like she said. So Britt Marie Was Here was like a spin-off of another one of his books. My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. Britt Marie was a character in that book, and basically the events in that book led to, or not the events in that book led to, but some of the events in that book highlighted her marriage and then the events of her divorce. So Britt Marie Was Here goes into her life after divorce, after being married for like 30 years and never really having her own sense of self, and just her path to discovery, basically trying to hold on to her structure, trying to hold on to just some semblance of normalcy, and just kind of how the events of her life is disrupted enough where she can kind of, for the first time, experience who she is as a person, make her own decisions, things like that. So Britt Marie as a person was, yes, very annoying. She was kind of like didn't really have a personality, really didn't have a sense of humor that she was aware of, just really kind of like a high-strung person.
Yeah, very like, ugh. She would be aggravating in real life. Like, yeah. She's like, really was annoying.
So yes, initially when you're reading that, it's kind of like, ooh, okay, I didn't like her, like I didn't care for her too much, and my grandmother that asked me to tell you she's sorry, whatever, I didn't care for her too much then, because she kind of came across the same way. So when you're reading this book, you're like, why is she getting her own story? Oh, the way she's acting is just really off-putting. So initially you're not, I would say I didn't connect with the character of Britt Marie. Even between the two books, I'm like, why? Mm-hmm. So initially I thought it was going to be one that I wasn't going to finish, but I love me some Frederick Bachman, so I said, you know what? let me hang in there. Let me hang in there. He knows how to give me the goods. So, and that's exactly what I did. And eventually I came to really care about Britt Marie. I started to root for her. I wanted her to be this strong and bolden woman, even though she was at the time, like in her 50s, 60s, whatever, like experiencing life for the first time. It's kind of like, yay, you. So I found myself just really, getting in there with Britt Marie and really being emotionally moved by the writing.
He does that though.
Yes. Eventually just really feeling like, dang, he turned this story around. So I will say that is when I was like, oh, Frederick, this is the one that's going to disappoint me. But eventually I was kind of like, okay, I can dig it. So that was Britt Marie Was Here by Frederick Bachman.
Okay, so the last book that started off a little slow for me, but I was determined to finish too because I just felt like I had set a deadline to read this author, and I was like, I have to read one of her books and get it out the way, so to speak. And that was Swing Time by Zadie Smith. So I have a couple of her books, and I had tried reading one of her other books a while ago and didn't finish it. But when I picked this one up, I liked the story. Basically, it's about two girls who live in I think they're based in London, and they are both like mixed biracial, and they are ballet dancers. And one of the girls like basically comes from a family that is a little more put together. Like she has her mom and her dad in her life, and she has like more of a stable home. And then her best friend, the other dancer, I forget their names, y'all, but her best friend is also a biracial girl, but she just lives with her mom, and kind of like her mom she doesn't have a stable as home as her friend. And it basically goes through like the relationship that the girls have, and up until their adulthoods, and how they kind of like are different and separate and then come back together, and just their dynamic of their relationship. And the girl that has the more stable home is the one who's narrating the book, and it's kind of told from her perspective and how she sees her friend and like their friendship. And it was a really good book. I will just say about Zadie Smith's writing, it is very wordy and it's very it's so like, it's kind of like Toni Morrison's writing, where it's just not in like the way she talks in circles, like how you feel.
Like literary.
Yeah, but just very literary, and like kind of like you have to
digest
you have to,
it.
you
have to take it in.
You have to take it in. It's one of those books like you might read a page and you'd be like, hold on, let me go back and read that, because to make sure I understood everything that was going on. So that's kind of what took me so long in reading her book. But it was a good story, and I did very much enjoy the book, and glad that I finished. But it did start off, and even though up towards the middle was still kind of like, not even slow, it's just kind of like a harder read.
Yeah.
Basically. So, but it didn't deter me from reading her other books. It did make me want to read some more of her. Like, I still want to read her book. So, because the story is good, and I can see why people like her writing and why she's, popular. So, yeah, that was it. Swing Time by Zadie Smith. Read it, y'all. Tell me what you think, and if you think, like, what I said about her is true. Because people love her. Like, people love her books, and they always rave about it and stuff. But I'm just like,
it's too much.
It's a lot for me. But
all right, well, that's pretty much it. Let us know some books that for you started off a certain way and had a nice pretty bow at the end. Yes. Nice little surprise.
But you're glad you finished and stuck through with it.
Yeah, that turned it around at some point. Like this video, subscribe, ring the bell, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.